The fabric of the Vera Wang gown felt like a second skin, a whisper of silk and lace that cost more than my first car. 200 of our closest friends and family were seated on pristine white chairs, their faces turned toward me like a field of sunflowers. The scent of gardenias and freshly cut grass from the 18th hole of the St. Charles Golf Club filled the warm September air. Everything was perfect. Almost. From the corner of my eye, I could see Mark standing at the altar, his smile as bright and reassuring as the afternoon sun. He looked at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and mouthed the words, "I love you." For 3 years, that smile had been my sanctuary, the place I went to feel safe. In 5 minutes, that smile would become the stuff of my nightmares. That was the last day I ever trusted a man's smile. It was the day I learned that the most monstrous betrayals are not committed by enemies, but by those we invite to sleep in our beds and sit at our tables. Before I tell you how my loyal dog saved my life and exposed a plot of unimaginable evil in front of 200 witnesses, you need to understand the lie I had been living for the past 3 years and the heartbreaking choice I was forced to make just 1 week before my wedding. But before we go there, if you find a piece of yourself in this story of trust and betrayal, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you this because I know someone out there needs to hear it. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 46 years old, and this is the story of how my golden retriever Max uncovered a murder plot at my own wedding. It started, as most manipulations do, with a lie so small and believable, it was almost an act of cruelty not to accept it. 3 months before the wedding, Mark started coughing. It began as a subtle tickle in his throat during dinner, a slight wheeze when he'd lie down at night. "It's just seasonal allergies, Em," he'd say, waving away my concern. "Happens every year." But this year was different. The coughing grew more persistent, his breathing more labored. He started complaining of rashes on his arms, itchy eyes, a constant fog in his head. Then came the performance. One evening, I came home from a long day at my furniture design studio to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, an inhaler in his hand, his face pale and drawn. Max was lying at his feet, thumping his tail against the hardwood floor. "I went to an allergist today," Mark said, his voice raspy. "He ran a full panel. Em, it's the dog. I've developed a severe adult-onset allergy to pet dander. The doctor said it's one of the worst cases he's ever seen. He said my respiratory system is in a constant state of inflammation." He looked at me, his eyes welling up with tears that seemed too readily available. He said if I continue to live with a dog, it could lead to permanent lung damage, maybe even anaphylaxis. He let the words hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Anaphylaxis, lung damage. These were not words, they were weapons. He knew I had rescued Max from a shelter 6 years ago after a bitter divorce. Max wasn't just a pet. He was the furry, four-legged constant who had licked away tears and forced me out for walks when grief felt like a lead blanket. He was family. Mark knew this. He also knew I loved him, that I was building a future with him. He presented me with an impossible choice, framed as a matter of his life and death. He made me choose between my past and my future, between the loyal companion who had healed my heart and the man I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. The choice, he knew, would be no choice at all. He watched me, his face a mask of sorrow, as he waited for me to break. And break I did. The gaslighting was a masterclass in psychological warfare, executed with the patience of a seasoned predator. Mark never raised his voice. He never gave me an ultimatum. He simply created a reality where Max was a walking, breathing hazard, a furry angel of death. The campaign began subtly. A week after his diagnosis, one of my favorite ceramic vases, a priceless piece from an art fair in Santa Fe, was shattered on the floor. I came home to find Mark sweeping up the pieces, a pained look on his face. "I'm so sorry, honey," he said, shaking his head. "Max must have had one of his zoomies. He just barreled through the living room and knocked it right off the pedestal." I looked at Max, who was sitting calmly in his bed, watching Mark with an unnerving stillness. It didn't feel right. Max was 6 years old, long past the puppy stage of random, destructive energy bursts. But Mark was so apologetic, so seemingly upset on my behalf, that I pushed the doubt away. A few days later, it was his expensive leather briefcase. He left it on the floor by the front door, a place he never put it. That evening, he pointed out a series of long, deep scratches across the front. "I guess Max thought it was a new chew toy," he sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "There goes $1,000. He looked at me, not with anger, but with a weary resignation that was far more effective. He was making me feel responsible, not just for the dog, but for the consequences of the dog's alleged actions. Each incident was a small cut, designed to sever the bond of trust I had with my pet. The most insidious part was how he began to tie Max's behavior to his own health. He started tripping over Max, always when I was in the room to witness it. He'd let out a sharp cry and grab his chest, panting dramatically. "Whoa, boy," he'd gasp, leaning against a wall. "You gotta be careful. You almost sent me flying. If I fall and hit my head..." He'd leave the threat unfinished, letting my own imagination fill in the horrific possibilities. He was planting a seed of fear. Max was not just destructive, he was dangerous, a liability, a threat to the man I loved. His coughing fits became theatrical performances, timed perfectly for when Max would enter a room. He'd be fine one moment, then the second Max patted in, Mark would erupt into a hacking, wheezing spasm that would leave him red-faced and seemingly struggling for air. "It's the dander," he'd whisper, clutching his inhaler like a lifeline. "It just hangs in the air. I can feel it in my lungs." He even printed out articles from the internet, highlighting phrases like progressive respiratory decline and sudden asthmatic attacks, and leaving them on the kitchen counter where I was sure to see them. He was building a prison of fear and guilt around me, and the only key, he made it seem, was getting rid of Max. The truth was, Max was the one who saw the bars. He had started growling at Mark, a low, guttural rumble, whenever Mark got too close to my office or my walk-in closet where I kept my personal safe. Mark would just laugh it off. "Looks like someone's a little territorial," he'd say to me. "He probably smells my cologne. Dogs are weird." But I saw the flicker of annoyance in his eyes. Max wasn't being territorial. He was being protective. He saw the predator long before I did. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night, exactly 1 week before the wedding invitations were set to be mailed. I had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal to furnish a new chain of boutique hotels, a career-defining achievement. I came home buzzing with excitement, a bottle of Dom Perignon in my hand, ready to celebrate with the man I loved. I found the house dark and silent. A note was on the kitchen island, written in Mark's neat architectural script. "Had another bad reaction. Went to the ER to be safe. Don't worry. I'm fine." My blood ran cold. I called his cell phone a dozen times. No answer. I drove to the nearest emergency room, my heart pounding against my ribs. The receptionist had no record of him. I checked another hospital, then a third. Nothing. Panic began to set in. I drove home, my mind racing through a Rolodex of horrible scenarios. When I walked in the door, he was sitting on the sofa, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, looking pale and fragile. "Where were you?" I cried, rushing to his side. "I was so worried." "I didn't go to the ER, he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't. I just drove around for hours trying to breathe." He took my hand. His was cold and clammy. Em, we need to talk. This isn't working. I love you more than anything, but I can't live like this. I can't be sick all the time. I can't be afraid to breathe in my own home. He looked past me, his gaze landing on Max, who had come to sit by my feet. It's him or me. It was the first time he had said it so plainly. The final, brutal chess move. He had manufactured a crisis, made me feel the terror of almost losing him, and then presented his ultimatum when I was at my most vulnerable. Tears streamed down my face. It felt like my world was collapsing. All the small incidents, the shattered vase, the scratched briefcase, the staged falls, they all coalesced into this one unbearable moment. He had constructed the narrative so perfectly that to argue against it felt like I was arguing against his very survival. There has to be another way, I pleaded. There isn't, he said, his voice firm but laced with a performed sadness. I've talked to the doctor. We've tried every filter, every medication. The only solution is a dander-free environment. For good. He pulled me into a hug, stroking my hair. I know how much you love him, and I swear if there was any other way, I would take it. But I want to have a long, healthy life with you, Emily. I want to grow old with you. I can't do that if I can't breathe. He was a damn virtuoso. He framed the ultimatum as an act of profound love for me. How could I refuse? How could I choose a dog over the health and longevity of my future husband? So, I agreed. The word felt like broken glass in my mouth. Okay, I whispered. Okay. His relief was immediate and palpable. He held me tighter, kissing the top of my head. Thank you, he murmured. We'll get through this. Just, it has to be soon. And he needs to go to a shelter far away. Somewhere we can't just go visit. We need a clean break for my health. The cruelty of that last part, the demand for a clean break, should have been a blaring alarm. But I was too lost in the fog of his manipulation to see it. That night, lying in bed next to him, I felt a profound sense of loss, but I also felt something else. A tiny, nagging voice in the back of my mind whispering, "This is wrong." I told myself it was just grief. I was wrong. It was intuition. The next morning, the lie took root in my own mouth. I called my younger brother, Liam, a veterinarian who lived about 5 miles away on the other side of Naperville. "Liam," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears, "I need a huge favor. And you have to promise me you won't tell a soul, especially not Mark." Liam, ever the calm in my storm, just listened. "I'm here, Em. What's going on?" I explained Mark's allergy, the ER scare, the ultimatum. I could feel his skepticism through the phone line. An adult-onset allergy that severe? It's rare, Em, and it usually presents with other autoimmune issues. Has he shown you the doctor's report? No, but he's been so sick, Liam. You haven't seen him. I can't risk his health, I said, parroting the lines I'd been fed. Mark wants me to take Max to a shelter, one far away. He wants a clean break. I finally choked on the words. But I can't do it. I can't abandon him. He's my boy. There was a long pause. Of course you can't, Liam said, his voice soft but firm. Bring him to me. He can stay with me and my girl, Daisy. They've known each other for years. He'll be safe and close. A wave of relief so intense it almost buckled my knees washed over me. Are you sure? It's a lot to ask. He's not just your dog, Em. He's family. You just tell Mark whatever you need to. I'll handle the rest. That afternoon, I packed a bag for Max. His favorite worn-out tennis ball, the plaid blanket he'd had since he was a puppy, a month's supply of his special joint support food. Each item I placed in the bag felt like a betrayal. Mark watched me from the doorway of the living room, his face a carefully constructed mask of sympathy. "This is the right thing to do, honey," he said softly. "It's the hardest thing that often are." I couldn't even look at him. I clipped the leash onto Max's collar, and the familiar jingle of his tags sounded like a death knell. He looked up at me, his big brown eyes filled with a confusion that shattered my heart into a million pieces. He knew something was wrong. He nudged his head against my hand, a low whine escaping his throat. I knelt and wrapped my arms around his thick, golden neck, burying my face in his fur, which smelled of cedar and sunshine. "I'm so sorry, buddy," I whispered, tears soaking his coat. "I love you so much." Mark put a hand on my shoulder. "I'll come with you." "No," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I have to do this alone." The lie felt heavy on my tongue as I drove. I told Mark I was taking Max to Safe Paws Rescue, a no-kill shelter 2 hours away in Wisconsin. He had even helped me look it up online, pointing out their excellent facilities. In reality, I drove straight to Liam's quiet suburban street. Liam was waiting on his front porch. When I opened the car door, Max bounded out, his tail giving a tentative wag when he saw Liam and his own golden retriever, Daisy, sniffing at the screen door. He was happy to see them, but he kept looking back at me, his expression asking the question I couldn't answer. "Why are you leaving me here?" Liam gave me a long hug. "He'll be okay, Em, I promise." I handed him the leash. It felt like I was handing over a piece of my soul. I drove away without looking back, because I knew if I saw his face in my rearview mirror, I would have turned around, and my whole, fragile, carefully constructed future with Mark would have come crashing down. That's what I told myself anyway. The truth is, I was a coward. I was so desperate to believe in the fairy tale that I willingly abandoned the one creature on earth who had always shown me unconditional love. While I was drowning in a manufactured sea of guilt and loss, Mark and Sarah were celebrating their victory in a place that matched the ugliness of their souls. A cheap, run-down motel off the I-90. The kind with flickering neon signs and sheets that smelled faintly of bleach and regret. I know this now because the police recovered text messages and motel receipts that painted a sickeningly clear picture. "It's done," Mark texted Sarah, less than 10 minutes after I'd driven away with Max. "The beast is gone. Phase 1 complete." Sarah's reply was instant. Finally. I couldn't stand that flea-bitten rug another second. "Meet me at the usual spot. I've got champagne." The usual spot was the Starlight Inn, room 207. A place so far removed from my world of custom-built mahogany tables and Egyptian cotton sheets that it might as well have been on another planet. It was their private kingdom of deceit. In that dingy room, surrounded by peeling wallpaper and the drone of a failing air conditioner, they laid out their plans for my future, or rather, my lack of one. Their arguments, pieced together from a string of angry texts later that night, were never about morality. They were about logistics and greed. "$5 million is a lot of money, Mark," Sarah wrote. "I want my half in a Swiss account the day the insurance clears. No arguments." "You'll get your cut when I say you get it," Mark retorted. "You're not the one taking the real risk here. I'm the one who has to play the grieving husband. I'm the one who has to deal with her insufferable family." "Don't you dare," Sarah shot back. "I'm the one who has to pretend to be your best friend, listen to her whine about her deadlines and her new fabric samples. I'm the one who sourced the thallium. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get that without a trace? I put my entire nursing career on the line for this. I deserve more than half for that alone." Thallium. A heavy metal, odorless, tasteless, once used as a rat poison. It causes a slow, agonizing death that mimics a neurological disorder. It was Sarah's contribution to the plan, a perversion of her medical knowledge. She was a nurse in the oncology ward at a downtown hospital, a position that gave her access to all manner of chemical compounds. The irony was grotesque. A healer plotting to kill. Their conversations in that motel room, as described in the police report, were a chilling blend of lust and avarice. They made love on a bed where they plotted my murder. They toasted with cheap champagne to my impending death. Mark detailed how he would get me to sign the final legal documents right after the honeymoon, merging my business, Carter Home, into a joint entity. He bragged about how easy it would be. "She trusts me completely," he'd told Sarah. "She's so desperate for a happy ending, she'd sign her own death warrant if I wrapped it in a Tiffany bow." And then there was the matter of the dog. "Good thing you got rid of Max," Sarah had said, according to Mark's later confession. "That dog knew. He never trusted either of us." It was true. Max had always been a problem for them. He had caught Mark trying to jimmy the lock on my antique safe one night and had bitten his hand hard enough to draw blood. Mark had passed it off as a playful accident. Another time, Sarah had come over for dinner, and Max had stood in the doorway, blocking her entrance with a relentless low growl until I physically pulled him away. At the time, I'd been embarrassed by his behavior. Now I understand. He wasn't being bad. He was being a judge of character. He had smelled the poison on them long before they ever brought it into my house. The roots of Sarah's jealousy ran deep, all the way back to a sun-drenched autumn afternoon at Northwestern University. We were both 19, full of the kind of boundless, naive optimism that only youth can afford. We met in a brutal art history survey course and bonded over late-night study sessions fueled by bad coffee and a shared sense of panic. I saw her as a kindred spirit. She saw me as a yardstick against which she constantly measured her own shortcomings. I came from a comfortable, upper-middle-class family. My father was a successful architect, my mother an art curator. Success was the air I breathed. It was expected, nurtured. Sarah's background was different. She was on a partial scholarship, the first in her family to attend college, and she carried the weight of their expectations like a physical burden. She was brilliant, driven, and fiercely proud, but there was always a shadow of insecurity lurking in her eyes. I never saw our differences in wealth as a barrier. If anything, I tried to erase them. When she couldn't afford the expensive textbooks for our shared major, I would buy 2 copies and leave one on her desk, pretending the bookstore had made a mistake. When my parents sent me a generous monthly allowance, I'd treat her to dinners at nice restaurants, saying I had a coupon that was about to expire. I thought I was being a good friend. I realize now that my casual generosity felt like charity to her. Every gesture of help was, in her eyes, another reminder of the chasm that separated our lives. The real turning point, the moment her envy curdled into something far more toxic, was the annual Dean's Prize for Excellence in Design. We both submitted portfolios. We had worked on them side by side in the studio for months, pushing each other, critiquing each other's work. I honestly believed her project, a brilliantly conceived plan for a low-income community center, was better than mine. But I won. My design for a modular, sustainable furniture line caught the eye of a judge who happened to be a big shot in the Chicago design world. I remember standing on the stage, holding the certificate and the check for $5,000, searching for her face in the crowd. When I found her, she was smiling, applauding along with everyone else. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, at the small party I threw in my dorm room, she pulled me aside. "You deserved it, Em," she said, giving me a hug. "You were born for this." The compliment felt wrong, like it was laced with something bitter. Born for this. She wasn't crediting my hard work. She was attributing my success to my pedigree, to some unfair cosmic advantage I held over her. She was erasing my effort to make my victory feel unearned. From that day on, something shifted. She changed her major to nursing the following semester. "I want to do something that matters," she'd told me. The implication being that my chosen path in furniture design was frivolous and superficial. We remained best friends, but a subtle competition now underscored everything. When I started my company after graduation with a loan from my father, she would make pointed remarks about how nice it must be not to have to worry about student debt. When I bought my first house, she commented on the square footage. She celebrated my successes with just enough feigned enthusiasm to seem supportive, but I could always sense the resentment simmering just beneath the surface. It was a quiet, patient, soul-corroding envy. And Mark, with his own desperate greed, was the match that finally set it ablaze. He didn't create her hatred for me. He just gave it a purpose and a plan. While I was blissfully addressing wedding invitations, my brother Liam was growing more suspicious with each passing day. The official story I'd given him was thin, and he knew it. But the most compelling evidence against Mark wasn't a hunch. It was a heartbroken 80-pound golden retriever. Max wasn't just sad. He was a different dog. At my house, he was vibrant, always ready with a nuzzle or a playful nudge of a tennis ball. At Liam's, he was lethargic and withdrawn. He'd spend hours lying by the front door, his nose pressed to the crack, waiting. He barely ate. He showed little interest in playing with Daisy, Liam's dog. It was more than separation anxiety. It was a deep, profound grief. But Liam, being a vet, noticed something else. Max's lethargy would vanish in an instant, replaced by a surge of adrenaline whenever one specific thing happened. The sound of a sports car. Mark drove a silver Porsche Boxster, a flashy, ostentatious vehicle that he claimed was a necessity for his real estate career. Its engine had a distinctive, throaty rumble. Whenever a similar-sounding car would drive down Liam's quiet straight, Max would bolt upright, a low growl vibrating in his chest, the fur on his back standing on end. He would race to the window, his body rigid, until the car passed. This wasn't the reaction of a dog missing its owner's fiancé. This was the reaction of a guard dog identifying a threat. Liam mentioned it to me on the phone. "It's strange, Em. He doesn't just miss you. He seems to hate Mark. Are you sure everything is okay with them?" "He's just adjusting," I said, the excuse sounding lame even to my own ears. Mark said Max snapped at him a few times. Maybe he's just holding a grudge. Liam didn't push it, but he started paying closer attention. The following Saturday, he offered to take my car, a Range Rover, for a full service and detail as a wedding gift. "You'll want it to be perfect for the honeymoon road trip," he'd said. It was a thoughtful gesture, but he had an ulterior motive. He had a friend who owned a high-end auto detailing shop, a place that specialized in forensic-level cleaning and bug sweeps for corporate executives worried about industrial espionage. He called me late that night. "Em, are you sitting down?" "Yes, why? Is something wrong with the car?" "The car is fine, but I found something. My guy did a full electronic sweep. There was a GPS tracker hidden in the undercarriage, wired directly to the battery." I was silent. A GPS tracker? It made no sense. "It must be a mistake. Some old LoJack system from a previous owner." "No, Em." Liam's voice was grim. "This one is new. Top of the line. Real-time tracking, accessible from a smartphone app. It was placed there within the last few months." There was only one person who had regular access to my car and the technical know-how to install something like that. Mark. He was a gadget fanatic, always playing with the latest tech. "Why would Mark track my car?" I whispered, the question directed more to myself than to Liam. "I don't know," he said, "but it's not the behavior of a man who trusts his fiancé. It's the behavior of a man who is monitoring a target." The word target sent a chill down my spine. "I've disabled it," Liam continued. And I've got it. Don't say anything to him, not a word. Let him think it's still working. Just be careful, Emily. Something is very wrong here. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. For the first time, the foundation of trust I had built my life on with Mark began to crack. It was just a hairline fracture, but it was there. I tried to reason it away. Maybe he was planning a surprise. Maybe he was worried about carjackers. But no explanation felt right. The nagging voice of intuition, the one I had silenced a week earlier, was back. And this time, it was screaming. The final week before the wedding was a whirlwind of last-minute preparations, a chaotic ballet of florists, caterers, and seating chart negotiations. Amid the flurry, Mark's behavior grew increasingly peculiar, planting more seeds of doubt in the freshly tilled soil of my suspicion. The GPS tracker had changed everything. It was a piece of irrefutable evidence that something was amiss, and it cast all of his subsequent actions in a sinister new light. His primary focus, almost to the point of obsession, was on a set of legal documents. He presented them to me one evening, casually, as I was reviewing floral arrangements. "Just some standard prenuptial stuff, honey," he said, spreading the thick stack of papers on the dining room table. "My lawyer drafted it. It basically protects both of our pre-existing assets, but merges everything we build together from this point on. It's a partnership agreement, really. A symbol of our new life. I was the owner of a multi-million-dollar debt-free company. He was a real estate agent who, despite his flashy car, often complained about the unpredictable nature of commission-based income. A standard prenup would have been designed to keep our assets separate. This document, as he described it, did the opposite. "Shouldn't my lawyer look this over?" I asked, a reasonable question for any business owner. A flicker of irritation crossed his face before he smoothed it over with a practiced smile. "Of course, if you want, but it's pretty straightforward. And my guy, he's the best. Really expensive. I thought we could just sign it and get it filed before the wedding. Have a clean slate. You know, to show we're a team, that we trust each other completely." There it was again. Trust. He wielded the word like a weapon, using it to shut down any dissent. The implication was clear. If I questioned the document, I was questioning our love. I told him I'd read it over, and he left the papers on the table, a silent testament to his supposed faith in our partnership. Meanwhile, Sarah had transformed into the most attentive, doting maid of honor imaginable. She was at my house almost every day, a whirlwind of helpful energy. But her help always seemed to revolve around one thing: my health and wellness. She started bringing me pre-mixed superfood smoothies in the morning. "You're under so much stress, Em," she'd say, handing me a green, sludgy concoction. "This is packed with vitamins and adaptogens. It will keep your immune system strong for the big day." She would bring over special calming teas at night, and even a box of what she called organic herbal supplements to help me sleep. "My own special blend," she'd said with a wink. At the time, I saw it as the thoughtful gesture of a concerned friend, a nurse putting her professional knowledge to good use. Now, I see it for what it was: a series of dress rehearsals. She was testing her delivery system. She was normalizing the act of giving me things to ingest, grooming me to accept a drink from her hand without a second thought. She was laying the groundwork for the final, fatal dose she planned to administer in my champagne glass at our wedding reception. The one moment of clarity I had during that week was almost accidental. Mark and I were at a charity gala. A friend of ours brought her new kitten, a tiny ball of fluff, and Mark, without thinking, scooped it up and started stroking its fur, cooing at it. He held it for a good 5 minutes. He didn't cough. He didn't wheeze. His eyes didn't water. He was perfectly, completely fine. When he noticed me staring, a look of panic flashed in his eyes. He quickly handed the kitten back, pulled out his inhaler, and took a theatrical puff. "Wow," he coughed. "The dander on that little guy is potent." But the mask had slipped. For a full 5 minutes, he had forgotten his lines, and I had seen the truth. The wedding day dawned bright and impossibly beautiful, a perfect jewel of a late summer day. The sky was a vast, cloudless, cerulean canvas. It felt like the universe itself was blessing our union. Or perhaps, I think now, it was just providing a stark, ironic contrast for the darkness that was about to unfold. I spent the morning in the bridal suite of the golf club, a luxurious space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured greens. My mother and my bridesmaids fluttered around me, a cloud of pastel chiffon and nervous energy. Sarah, of course, was the center of the storm, directing everything with an unnerving calm. She steamed my veil, laid out my jewelry, and personally handed me a glass of champagne. "Just one," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "To calm the nerves." I took a small sip, my stomach churning too much for alcohol. She watched me drink it with an intensity that, in retrospect, was terrifying. As I slipped into my dress, the unease that had been simmering for weeks began to boil. The GPS tracker, the suspicious legal documents, Mark's miraculous recovery around the kitten. Each memory was a discordant note in the symphony of my perfect day. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, a CEO in a couture gown, about to sign the most important merger of her life with a man she suddenly realized she didn't know at all. "You look breathtaking, Emily," Sarah said, coming to stand behind me. She placed her hands on my shoulders, her reflection smiling at mine in the mirror. Her eyes, however, told a different story. They were cold, flat, like chips of polished granite. There was no warmth, no genuine happiness for her best friend. There was only a chilling, triumphant gleam. It was the look of a predator who has cornered its prey. In that moment, I saw her. For the first time, I truly saw the venomous envy she had hidden behind a mask of friendship for 2 decades. My blood ran cold. The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening certainty. The allergy was a lie. Max hadn't been a threat to Mark's health. He had been a threat to their plan. They needed him gone. Illegal documents weren't about partnership. They were about plunder. And Sarah's wellness campaign? Dear God. My hand flew to my stomach, a wave of nausea washing over me. The smoothies, the teas, the supplements. Had it already started? Was I already being poisoned? "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with fake concern. "You look pale. Here, sit down. Let me get you some water." "No," I said, my voice coming out as a choked whisper. I had to get out. I had to stop this. But how? The ceremony was scheduled to start in 10 minutes. 200 guests were waiting. My entire world was about to detonate, and I was standing at the epicenter. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal fight-or-flight instinct. I had to warn someone. I fumbled for my phone to call Liam, but Sarah was too quick. She gently took it from my hand. "No distractions," she said, her smile never wavering. "It's bad luck for the bride to see her phone before she walks down the aisle. I'll keep it safe for you." She slipped it into her own purse, a chic but oversized designer tote bag, and placed it on a chair in the corner of the room. The trap had been sprung. I was isolated, disarmed, and about to be delivered to my executioners. 5 miles away, a drama of a different kind was unfolding. Liam had planned to bring Max to the wedding. Not to the ceremony itself, he knew that would be too much for me, but he was going to leave him in his air-conditioned SUV in the parking lot with a fresh bowl of water and a chew toy. He had a gut feeling that something was going to go wrong, and he wanted to be able to get me and Max out of there quickly if needed. He told me later that it was a premonition he couldn't shake. He called it veterinarian's intuition. As he clipped the leash onto Max's collar to walk him out to the car, his phone buzzed. It was a text from me, or rather, from my phone. It read, "Change of plans. Mark is surprising me with a limo. You can ride with Mom and Dad. See you there. XOM. Liam frowned. It didn't sound like me. I was a meticulous planner. Last-minute changes of that nature were not my style. And the XO? I never used that in texts. He tried calling me back. The call went straight to voicemail. That's when he knew. Something was definitely wrong. Sarah, in her arrogance, had made a critical error. She had tried to mimic me, but she had gotten the details wrong, and in doing so, she had alerted the one person who was already on high alert. At that exact moment, as if sensing the urgency that was crackling through the airwaves, Max did something he had never done before. He lunged. With a sudden, powerful twist of his body, he snapped the leather leash right at the handle. Before Liam could react, Max was gone, a blur of golden fur streaking across the lawn. He wasn't running aimlessly. He was running with a purpose, his nose to the ground, heading east, straight towards the St. Charles Golf Club. Back in the bridal suite, my father appeared at the door, his eyes misty. "It's time, sweetheart." The music had started, a soft, classical piece that now sounded like a funeral dirge. I was trapped. Sarah gave my shoulders a final, possessive squeeze and walked out to take her place at the head of the bridal party. I was frozen, my mind racing. Should I scream? Should I run? What could I even say? My fiancé and my best friend are trying to kill me. They would think I was having a nervous breakdown. They had insulated themselves so perfectly with their masks of love and concern. My father took my arm, his grip gentle but firm. "Don't be nervous. He's a good man, Emily." I let him lead me out of the room and towards the long green aisle. Every step felt like a step towards my own grave. I saw Mark waiting for me, his face beaming. The sight of him made my stomach roil. I saw the faces of our guests, smiling, some of them crying tears of joy. They were watching a fairy tale, oblivious to the horror story unfolding behind the scenes. The minister began to speak, his voice a calm, resonant drone. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." I stared at Mark, trying to project all of my hatred and disgust through my eyes, but he just met my gaze with a look of pure adoration. The performance was flawless. And then I heard it. A faint sound at first, a disturbance from the back of the crowd. A few guests turned their heads. The sound grew louder. It was a frantic, rhythmic panting. The sound of paws hitting stone pavers at a dead run. A shout of surprise erupted, then another. And then he burst through the floral archway at the end of the aisle. It was Max. He was a magnificent, terrifying sight. A golden cannonball of pure, unadulterated loyalty. His chest was heaving, his tongue lolling out of the side of his mouth. A piece of the broken leather leash was still attached to his collar, whipping through the air as he ran. He had clearly run the entire 5 miles from Liam's house, a feat of endurance fueled by an instinct I was only just beginning to understand. A collective gasp swept through the 200 guests. People in the back rows jumped to their feet. My father, standing beside me, whispered, "What on earth?" But Max paid them no mind. He had no interest in the bride, the groom, or the startled minister. His eyes, laser-focused and burning with intent, were locked on one thing and one thing only: the front row, where the bridal party was seated. He veered off the aisle, a low, menacing growl rumbling in his chest. He barreled past my mother, who shrieked and pulled her feet up onto her chair. He ignored Mark, who had taken a step back, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Max launched himself, not at a person, but at an object. Sarah's oversized $5,000 designer handbag, which she had placed on the empty chair beside her. With the ferocity of a wolf taking down its prey, he clamped his powerful jaws onto the expensive leather and shook his head violently. The sound of tearing fabric and the clatter of metal hardware echoed through the stunned silence. He ripped and he tore, thrashing back and forth, a primal, untamed force unleashed upon the perfectly manicured scene. Sarah screamed, a high-pitched, genuine shriek of terror and rage.
"Get him off! Some get him off my bag!"
But no one moved. Everyone was frozen, watching the bizarre, surreal spectacle unfold. With one final, savage jerk, the bag ripped open, its contents spewing across the pristine white stone floor like a vile confession. A tube of lipstick rolled to a stop near the minister's feet. A compact mirror shattered. A wallet, a set of keys, and a bundle of receipts scattered. But it was the other items, the ones that had been hidden in the bag's inner pockets, that brought the world to a screeching halt. There, for all 200 guests to see, was a sheaf of papers with a bold, red, overdue stamp at the top. It was a notice from a casino bookie demanding a payment of $75,000 from Mark, with a handwritten note at the bottom that read, "Last warning, pal." Next to it lay 2 one-way airline tickets to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, departing the very next morning, under the names Mark Peterson and Sarah Bell. A small, folded piece of paper fluttered open, revealing itself to be a sonogram report dated just 2 weeks prior. At the top, in clear black letters, was the patient's name, Sarah Bell. Gestational age, 8 weeks. And then there was the thickest document of all. A life insurance policy for $5 million, taken out on me, Emily Carter, with the primary beneficiary listed as my husband, Mark Peterson. My signature was at the bottom, a clumsy, obvious forgery. The silence was absolute. The only sound was Max, standing over the wreckage, panting, his duty done. The final, damning piece of evidence landed with a soft thud, almost unnoticed in the initial shock. It was a small, unassuming bottle from inside a box labeled Organic Vitality Supplements, the same box Sarah had given me just days before. The bottle had rolled under the minister's podium, but the cap had popped off in the chaos, and a few of the clear, gel-filled capsules had spilled out, one of them breaking open. A fine white powder, almost like salt, was now dusted onto the white stone. It was odorless, it was innocuous, and it was the linchpin of their entire plot. My shock, which had frozen me in place, instantly crystallized into a cold, hard rage. Everything I had suspected, everything Liam had warned me about, was now laid bare for the world to see. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a premeditated conspiracy to steal my life, my company, and my future, orchestrated by the 2 people I had trusted most in the world. My father was the first to react, his face turning a mottled shade of red. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice echoing across the silent crowd. Mark, his face ashen, took a step towards me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Emily, honey, this is a mistake. It's not what it looks like. She's obsessed with me. She's trying to sabotage us." Sarah, however, chose that moment to completely unravel. "Obsessed?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Mark. "You're the one who came to me, drowning in debt. You're the one who cooked up this whole sick plan. I was just helping you." They were turning on each other, their pact of greed dissolving into a cesspool of panicked self-preservation right before our eyes. I ignored them both. My gaze was fixed on a man in the 3rd row, Officer David Chen, a family friend and a guest at the wedding, still in his dress blues, as he had come straight from his shift. Our eyes met. I didn't need to say a word. He was already on his feet, his hand resting on his service weapon, his expression shifting from that of a wedding guest to a cop on duty. "Don't move," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I looked from Mark's terrified face to Sarah's hysterical one. "Don't either of you move a single inch." I walked forward, my wedding dress train whispering behind me, and knelt on the cold stone floor. I picked up the forged life insurance policy. My hands were perfectly steady. I then picked up the sonogram. 8 weeks. She had been pregnant with his child, while she was helping me pick out floral arrangements. The sickness of it all was overwhelming. "You were going to poison me," I said, looking directly at Sarah. It wasn't a question. "At my own wedding reception. In a champagne toast, probably." Sarah's face crumpled. The fight went out of her, replaced by a pathetic, whimpering denial. Mark, meanwhile, was backing away slowly, his eyes darting towards the exit like a cornered animal. But there was nowhere to run. Officer Chen was already there, blocking his path, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Sir, I need you to stay right where you are." The click of handcuffs being opened was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my old life ending, and my new one, a harder but truer one, beginning. In the midst of the chaos, Max came over and sat beside me, nudging his head gently against my arm. A silent, furry guardian who had just saved me from a fate worse than I could have ever imagined. The scene devolved into a surreal tableau. A bride in a white Vera Wang gown, kneeling on a stone floor covered in the evidence of a murder plot. A groom in a tuxedo, his face contorted in a mask of fear, being placed in handcuffs. A maid of honor, her designer dress now looking cheap and tawdry, sobbing hysterically as a second officer, who had also been a guest, came to her side. The 200 guests were a silent, gaping chorus, their faces a mixture of horror, pity, and morbid fascination. The fairy tale wedding had become a true crime spectacle. Liam arrived then, running down the aisle, the broken half of Max's leash still in his hand. He took in the scene, the police, the scattered evidence, me on the floor with Max, and his face hardened with a grim understanding. He came straight to me, pulling me to my feet and wrapping me in a fierce hug. "I knew it," he whispered in my ear. "I knew something was wrong." "You were right," I whispered back, my voice finally breaking. The adrenaline that had sustained me began to fade, replaced by a deep, shuddering shock. "They were going to kill me, Liam." The police were efficient and professional, their wedding guest personas shed completely. Officer Chen carefully collected every piece of evidence from the floor, placing each item into separate evidence bags. The debt notice, the tickets, the sonogram, the forged policy, and most importantly, the bottle of supplements and the spilled powder. Sarah, seeing the vial being sealed, let out a final, desperate cry. "It's just vitamins, I swear!" But her protests were drowned out by the sound of her own sobs. As they were being led away, Mark made one last pathetic attempt to save himself. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Emily, please, tell them it's a misunderstanding. I love you." I stared back at him, the man whose smile had once been my sanctuary. I felt nothing. No love, no hate, not even pity. Just a vast, cold emptiness. "The only one who ever truly loved me in this whole mess," I said, my voice clear and steady enough to carry to the front rows, "is the one you made me get rid of." I placed my hand on Max's head, and he looked up at me, thumping his tail softly against my dress. The walk of shame for Mark and Sarah was excruciating. They were led down the very aisle they had walked so proudly just minutes before, past the rows of stunned faces. My mother was weeping in my father's arms. My bridesmaids were huddled together, looking lost and horrified. As they passed the front row, Sarah's gaze fell upon her own parents, a quiet, simple couple from out of state who looked utterly devastated, their faces etched with a confusion and shame that was heartbreaking to witness. This was the collateral damage of their greed, the lives they had shattered in pursuit of my money. Once they were gone, a heavy, awkward silence fell over the guests. No one knew what to do. The minister, looking completely shell-shocked, simply closed his book and walked away. One by one, in small, quiet groups, the guests began to leave, murmuring condolences as if they were at a funeral. And in a way, they were. It was the funeral for the life I thought I was going to have. But as I stood there, my hand resting on my loyal dog, surrounded by the wreckage of my former life. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a survivor. And for the first time in a very long time, I knew with absolute certainty who my real friends were. The days that followed the non-wedding were a blur of police interviews, legal consultations, and the slow, painful process of dismantling a life that had been built on a foundation of lies. The Naperville Police Department, with Officer Chen leading the investigation, moved swiftly. The evidence from the wedding venue was overwhelming, but the true depth of Mark and Sarah's depravity was uncovered when they executed a search warrant on Sarah's apartment and forensic analysts cracked open their phones. The text messages were a bottomless well of poison. They chronicled the entire conspiracy from its inception over a year ago to their gloating texts on the day they convinced me to get rid of Max. They had a shared digital folder, password protected, filled with my company's financial records, which Mark had been secretly downloading from my home computer. They had screenshots of my personal bank accounts and investment portfolios. They had even drafted a fake suicide note, full of maudlin prose about the pressures of running a business, which they planned to plant after my death to throw off any initial investigation. The most chilling discovery was their search history. Sarah had spent months researching tasteless, odorless poisons, focusing on compounds that would mimic the symptoms of a rare neurological disease. Thallium was her final choice. She had searched for lethal dosage of thallium sulfate, how to administer thallium without detection, and thallium poisoning symptoms. Mark, for his part, had been researching countries with no extradition treaty with the United States, which explained the one-way tickets to Brazil. He had also been looking up how long after death does life insurance pay out, and contesting a forged signature on legal documents. They were arrogant, sloppy, and so confident in my gullibility that they had left a digital breadcrumb trail straight to their own damnation. The police brought me in to listen to a voicemail. It was from one of Mark's bookies, left the morning of the wedding. The man's voice was calm but menacing. "Mark, it's Vinny. The 75 grand is now 100, with interest. You got till Monday. After that, I can't guarantee your kneecaps will be in working order for your honeymoon. Pay up." The police explained that this was likely the catalyst for their timeline. They weren't just greedy, they were desperate. Mark's gambling addiction had put him in a hole so deep he was willing to commit murder to climb out of it. Facing the mountain of evidence against them, Mark and Sarah's united front crumbled completely. Their love affair, born of mutual greed and envy, curdled into a vicious, toxic blame game. From their separate interrogation rooms, they sang like canaries, each trying to paint the other as the mastermind to save their own skin. The lead detective, a world-weary man named Jacobson, sat with me in a small, sterile room. "In my 20 years on the force," he said, shaking his head, "I've seen a lot of evil. But this is cold. The level of premeditation, the betrayal of trust. They're a special kind of monster." He slid a file across the table. It was the preliminary lab report on the supplements. The powder was almost pure thallium sulfate. The amount in just one of those capsules would have been enough to kill a grown man. Sarah had given me a whole bottle. The trial was a media circus. The wedding plot, the local news stations called it. A story of love, greed, and betrayal in the affluent suburbs of Chicago. It was irresistible. I was forced to relive every painful detail on the witness stand. My private life laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom. But as I spoke, looking out at the jury, and then at Mark and Sarah sitting at the defendant's table, I found a strength I didn't know I possessed. My testimony was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. I walked the jury through the gaslighting campaign, the faked allergy, the emotional manipulation that led to me giving up Max. I detailed the strange legal documents, Sarah's sudden obsession with my health, Mark's slip-up with the kitten. My voice was steady, my memories clear. I was not a woman scorned. I was a CEO presenting a case study on a failed and hostile takeover of my life. Liam's testimony was crucial. He presented the GPS tracker to the court, and the prosecution showed the data logs, proving that Mark had been tracking my movements for months, paying special attention to my visits to my lawyer and financial advisor. Liam also testified as a veterinary expert, explaining that Max's aggressive behavior towards Mark and Sarah was a clear sign of a protective animal identifying a perceived threat, not random misbehavior. The defense attorneys tried to paint me as a hysterical, paranoid woman, and Sarah and Mark as victims of a tragic misunderstanding. Mark's lawyer argued that the debt was a private matter, and the tickets to Brazil were for a surprise honeymoon. Sarah's lawyer claimed the thallium was for a gardening project to kill rodents at her apartment complex, an assertion that was met with open scoffing from the jury. The most dramatic moments of the trial, however, came when Mark and Sarah turned on each other on the stand. Under cross-examination, their carefully constructed facades shattered. Mark, his voice rising to a panicked shout, pointed at Sarah and yelled, "It was all her idea. She was the one who was obsessed with Emily's money. She's the one who knew about poisons. She was twisting my mind, telling me this was the only way out of my debt." When it was Sarah's turn, she was even more venomous. She stood up in the witness box, her face a mask of rage, and stared directly at Mark. "He is a pathetic, compulsive gambler who would have sold his own mother for a poker chip. He came to me with this plan. He threatened me. He said if I didn't help him, his bookies would come after both of us." She then delivered the final brutal blow, looking at the jury with tears streaming down her face. "I was pregnant with his child," she sobbed. "And he asked me to put poison in my best friend's champagne. What kind of monster does that?" The courtroom was in an uproar. It was a spectacular implosion, a masterclass in mutual destruction. They weren't just pointing fingers, they were trying to tear each other to shreds to lessen their own culpability. But the jury saw through it all. They saw two deeply flawed, greedy people who had formed a partnership in evil, and now, facing the consequences, were showing their true, cowardly colors. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was read in a courtroom so quiet you could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Guilty, on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, forgery, wire fraud. The words washed over me, not with a sense of triumph, but with a profound, weary relief. It was over. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Atherton, did not mince words. She looked down from her bench at Mark and Sarah, who stood in their orange prison jumpsuits, a pathetic shadow of the glamorous couple they had once pretended to be. "Mr. Peterson, Miss Bell," she began, her voice ringing with contempt. "For months, this court has listened to testimony detailing a plot of such cold, calculated cruelty that it shocks the conscience. You preyed upon the love and trust of a woman who considered you her future husband and her closest friend. You conspired not just to steal her wealth, but to extinguish her life in a slow, agonizing manner, for nothing more than money and a life of leisure you felt you were entitled to." She looked at Mark. "Mr. Peterson, your actions were driven by a breathtaking cowardice. You manipulated, you lied, and you were willing to kill to cover your own pathetic gambling debts. You are a parasite, and you will be treated as such." She sentenced him to 25 years in a federal penitentiary, with no possibility of parole for 20. A gasp went through the courtroom. Then she turned to Sarah. "Ms. Bell, your betrayal is, in some ways, even more profound. You took an oath as a nurse to do no harm. Yet you used your specialized knowledge to select a weapon of horrific cruelty. You betrayed the sacred trust of friendship, a bond you cultivated for 2 decades with the sole purpose of one day exploiting it. You are a disgrace to your profession and a stain on human decency." She sentenced Sarah to 15 years in state prison. The state nursing board had already permanently revoked her license. As the sentence was read, Sarah, who had lost the baby due to a violent altercation with another inmate while awaiting trial, let out a hollow sob and collapsed. Mark didn't even look at her. He just stared straight ahead, his face a blank mask. The aftermath of their sentencing brought a strange kind of closure. The news reports detailed their fates. Mark, upon entering the federal system, was immediately targeted by inmate gangs connected to his old bookies. His debt had followed him behind bars. The man who had tried to play the alpha male had become the lowest rung on the prison food chain. Sarah, stripped of her career and her child, was a broken woman, left to fade into obscurity in the anonymity of the prison system. I walked out of the courthouse that day into the bright Chicago sunshine, with Liam on one side and my father on the other. I didn't feel vengeful or victorious. I just felt free. The weight of their deceit, a weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying, was finally lifted. As we got to the car, my phone buzzed. It was a news alert with a photo of Mark and Sarah being led from the courtroom. I deleted it without a second thought. Their story was over. Mine was just beginning. In the quiet months that followed the trial, I began the difficult work of rebuilding. It wasn't just about moving on. It was about excavating my own life to understand how I had allowed such a monstrous deception to take root. I sold the house I had shared with Mark, the one filled with memories that were now tainted and fraudulent. Every room held a ghost of a lie, every piece of furniture a silent witness to his betrayal. I sold it at a loss, just to be free of it. I found a new place, a modern townhouse in a quieter part of the city, with a small private yard. The first piece of furniture I moved in was Max's dog bed. He was my anchor in the storm, my living, breathing reminder that true loyalty does exist. He rarely left my side, as if sensing my fragility. He would rest his heavy head on my lap while I worked, or follow me from room to room, his presence a constant, comforting reassurance. Therapy became my second sanctuary. I spent hours with a brilliant, compassionate psychologist who helped me unpack the years of subtle manipulation I had endured. She helped me see that my trust in Mark hadn't been a weakness, but rather an extension of my own honest nature. I had projected my own integrity onto him, refusing to believe that someone could smile to my face while plotting my demise. "You weren't blind, Emily," my therapist told me. "You were just looking at the world through a lens of decency. The fault is not in your lens. It's in the duplicity of the people you were viewing." My work became my salvation. Carter Home, my business, had taken a hit during the media frenzy of the trial. Sales had dipped as my name became synonymous with scandal. Some of my corporate clients had paused their contracts, wary of the negative publicity. But now, with the trial over, I poured all of my fractured energy back into my designs. My new collection was different. It was bolder, more resilient. I worked with stronger materials: reclaimed steel, solid oak, burnished leather. It was as if I were subconsciously rebuilding my own life through the furniture I was creating. The turning point came during a branding meeting. My marketing team was struggling with how to reposition the company, how to move my story away from the victim narrative the media had created. We were brainstorming logos, mission statements, ad campaigns, and everything felt flat and inauthentic. I was staring out the window, watching Max chase a squirrel in the park across the street, and it hit me with the force of a revelation. "That's it," I said, interrupting my marketing director mid-sentence. "It's been right in front of me this whole time." I sketched a rough design on a notepad. It was a simple, elegant silhouette of a golden retriever's head, its expression loyal and protective. Underneath, I wrote the new company tagline: "Carter Home, the foundation of a loyal home." My team was silent for a moment, and then a slow smile spread across my director's face. "I love it," she said. "It's honest. It's powerful. It's your story." We weren't running from my past anymore. We were embracing it. We were turning my greatest vulnerability into my company's greatest strength. Max hadn't just saved my life. He had just saved my business. The rebranding of Carter Home around the image of Max was more successful than I could have ever imagined. The new logo, the Max silhouette, began appearing on everything. Our delivery trucks, our shopping bags, the small brass plates on the back of every piece of furniture we sold. Our new marketing campaign told a story, not the gory details of the murder plot, but a more universal story of loyalty, resilience, and the meaning of home. Commercials featured beautiful interiors, yes, but they always ended with a shot of a family, happy and safe, with a loyal dog at their feet. The tagline, "The foundation of a loyal home," resonated with people on a deep emotional level. The story, my story, which had once been a source of public shame, became a source of inspiration. I started receiving letters and emails from people all over the country. Women who had escaped abusive relationships, men who had been betrayed in business, people who had lost everything and were fighting to rebuild. They saw their own struggles reflected in my company's new identity. They weren't just buying furniture, they were buying a piece of that resilience. Sales didn't just recover, they skyrocketed. We expanded into 2 new states, and the Max logo became a recognizable symbol of quality and integrity. I also made a significant business decision. I started a charitable foundation, the Max Project, funded by a percentage of Carter Home's profits. Its mission was twofold: to provide funding to under-resourced animal shelters and to support programs that provided therapy animals to survivors of trauma and domestic abuse. It was my way of honoring the silent, furry hero who had saved me, and of turning the ugliest chapter of my life into a force for good. My personal life also found a new, quieter rhythm. The circle of people I trusted was smaller now, but it was rock solid. Liam and his family were my core. My parents, who had been horrified by the whole ordeal, became more present and protective than ever before. My friendships were deeper, more meaningful. I had learned the hard way to distinguish between acquaintances and true allies. One afternoon, about a year after the sentencing, I was at an off-leash dog park with Max. He was chasing after a tennis ball, a happy, carefree dog once more. A man, probably around my age, came up beside me. His own dog, a scruffy terrier mix, was playing nearby. "That's a beautiful golden," he said with a warm smile. "Thank you," I replied. "He's the best." "He looks familiar," the man said, tilting his head. Is he the Carter Home dog?" I laughed. "Yes, he is. He's the original." The man's smile widened. His name was Ben. He was an architect, and he told me he had just specified our furniture for a new hotel project he was designing. We stood there for an hour, talking about dogs, design, and second chances. There was no pretense, no agenda. It was just a simple, honest conversation. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him without hesitation. I didn't know if it would lead anywhere, and for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. My happiness was no longer contingent on finding a happily ever after with someone else. I had already found it within myself, in my work, and in the unwavering loyalty of the amazing dog who would refuse to let me go. The relationship with Ben unfolded slowly, cautiously, like a flower unfurling in the early morning sun. He was the antithesis of Mark. He was quiet where Mark was loud, thoughtful where Mark was impulsive, and his calm, steady presence was a balm to my still healing soul. He knew my story, of course. Everyone in Chicago did. But he never treated me like a fragile artifact or a tabloid headline. He treated me like Emily, a woman who loved dogs, had a passion for mid-century modern design, and had a terrible habit of singing off-key in the car. Our first date was not a fancy dinner or a show. It was a walk along the lakefront with Max and his terrier, Scrappy. It was comfortable, easy. We talked for hours, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. He told me about his own painful divorce years earlier, the betrayal he had felt, and how designing buildings had been his way of reclaiming a sense of order and purpose in his life. He understood, without me having to explain, the profound need to build something solid and true, after the foundations of your life have been reduced to rubble. He never pushed, never pried. When I was ready to talk about what had happened, he listened with an empathy that was both heartbreaking and healing. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He just sat with me in the discomfort of it, his presence a silent testament of support. One evening, we were sitting on my couch, a glass of wine in hand, and I found myself telling him about the gaslighting, about the shattered vase and the scratched briefcase. I told him about the guilt I had felt, the way I had allowed Mark to turn me against my own intuition and against my loyal dog. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that shifted my perspective entirely. "You know," he said, looking at Max sleeping at our feet, "we design buildings to withstand earthquakes and hurricanes. We build in redundancies, shear walls, deep foundations. But we don't build our lives that way. We build them on trust, which is the strongest and most fragile material in the world. Your foundation wasn't weak, Emily. You were just hit by a storm that no one could have predicted." He made me see that I wasn't to blame for being trusting. The blame lay solely with those who had exploited that trust. It was a simple distinction, but it was one I had struggled to make on my own. With Ben, I learned to trust again. Not just him, but myself. I started listening to that quiet inner voice, the one I had ignored for so long. I learned that true strength wasn't about building walls around your heart. It was about having the wisdom to know who to give the key to. Our relationship wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow, deliberate construction, built brick by brick on a foundation of honesty, shared experience, and mutual respect. And it was stronger and more beautiful than any fairy tale I had ever dared to imagine. As Carter Home grew, so did the Max Project. What started as a small local initiative quickly gained national attention. The story of a company rebranding around its owner's heroic dog was unique and compelling. We were featured in business magazines and on morning talk shows, not because of the salacious details of the crime, but because of the positive work we were doing. I hired a dedicated director for the foundation, a passionate animal welfare advocate named Maria, and together we expanded its reach. We funded the construction of new wings for animal shelters, created mobile spay and neuter clinics for low-income communities, and established a grant program for smaller, independent rescue organizations that were often overlooked. The part of the project that remained closest to my heart, however, was the therapy animal program. We partnered with psychologists and trauma centers to create a streamlined process for survivors of domestic violence to be paired with a rescue animal, with the foundation covering all adoption fees, training, and initial veterinary care. I would often visit the training centers, watching as these quiet, gentle animals, many of whom had been abandoned or abused themselves, provided a unique form of healing that no human therapist could replicate. During one such visit, I met a young woman named Jessica. She was quiet and withdrawn, her eyes holding a familiar shadow of fear and betrayal. She had just left a relationship that was not just emotionally, but physically abusive. She was paired with a gentle, one-eyed pit bull mix named Blue. At first, she was hesitant, barely making eye contact with the dog. But Blue was patient. He just sat quietly by her feet, his tail giving a soft, rhythmic thump against the floor. After a few minutes, Jessica tentatively reached out and stroked his head. Blue leaned into her touch, letting out a soft, contented sigh. Tears began to stream down Jessica's face. It was the first time she had allowed herself to be vulnerable, to give or receive affection, in years. I spoke with her afterwards. "He doesn't want anything from me," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "He doesn't judge me. He just is. He makes me feel safe." In that moment, I understood the true power of what we were doing. We weren't just saving animals. We were creating partnerships. We were facilitating these small, sacred connections that could literally save a person's life, just as Max had saved mine. The Max Project became the soul of my company. It infused our corporate culture with a sense of purpose, beyond profit margins and quarterly earnings. My employees were proud to work for a company that was making a tangible difference in the world. It was the ultimate alchemy, turning the darkest, most painful experience of my life into a source of light and hope for countless others. About 3 years after the trial, a letter arrived at my office. It was postmarked from a small town in rural Illinois, and the return address was a name I didn't recognize. The handwriting on the envelope was frail, shaky. Curious, I opened it. It was from Sarah's mother. I steeled myself, expecting a letter filled with anger, accusations, or a plea for money. But it was none of those things. It was a short, simple, and heartbreaking letter of apology. "Dear Ms. Carter," it began. "I don't know if you will even read this, and I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away. I am Sarah's mother. I am writing to you today to say what should have been said a long time ago. I am so deeply, truly sorry for the unimaginable pain my daughter caused you. There are no words to express the shame and sorrow our family feels." She went on to explain that they had been completely blindsided by Sarah's actions. They had always known she was competitive and sometimes insecure, but they never could have fathomed the depths of her darkness. She wrote about the years of visiting Sarah in prison, of watching her daughter's initial defiance slowly crumble into a hollowed-out regret. "She lost everything," her mother wrote. "Her career, her child, her freedom. And she knows she has no one to blame but herself. She talks about you sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of sad wonder. She says you were the only real friend she ever had, and she destroyed you both out of a sickness in her soul she can't explain. We pray for you, Ms. Carter. We pray that you have found peace." The letter left me feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was a sense of validation, of course, but there was also a profound sadness. Sadness for the quiet, unassuming parents who had to live with the public shame of their daughter's crimes. Sadness for the waste of it all. The waste of Sarah's intelligence, her career, her life. The envy that had driven her had been like a cancer, eating away at her from the inside until there was nothing left but the disease. I thought about writing back, but I didn't know what I would say. Instead, I wrote a check. Not to Sarah or her parents, but a significant anonymous donation to the prison's educational program, earmarked for inmates seeking counseling and mental health services. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. I don't know if I could ever truly forgive what they planned to do, but it was a letting go. It was a final closing of the book. I was choosing to invest in the possibility of rehabilitation, in the faint hope that even in the darkest of souls, a flicker of light could be rekindled. I was choosing to build, not to destroy. It was the only way I knew how to live. Life settled into a beautiful, predictable rhythm. My relationship with Ben deepened into a loving, stable partnership. We didn't get married. Neither of us felt the need for a piece of paper to validate our commitment. We bought a house together, a stunning, modern design on a wooded lot, with a huge yard for Max and Scrappy to patrol. We built a life based on shared passions, quiet evenings, and the simple joy of each other's company. My company continued to thrive, and the Max Project became a leading foundation in the animal welfare community. Max himself became a beloved local celebrity. He was the Grand Marshal of the annual pet parade, and we did a yearly photo shoot with him for the Carter Home Holiday Catalog. He grew older, his golden muzzle turning a distinguished white, his steps a little slower, but his eyes never lost their loving, intelligent spark. One crisp autumn evening, about 5 years after the wedding that wasn't, I was sitting with Ben on our back porch, watching the sun set through the trees. Max was lying at my feet, his head resting on my ankles. I was scrolling through my phone when a news article caught my eye. It was from a national wire service with the headline, "Disgraced real estate agent found dead in federal prison." My breath hitched. I clicked the link. Mark had been killed in a prison fight. The article was sparse on details, citing an ongoing investigation, but it mentioned that the fight was believed to be related to long-standing gambling debts. Vinny the bookie had finally collected. Then saw the look on my face. "What is it?" I showed him the phone. He read the article, his expression unreadable. He put his arm around me. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. I thought about it for a long moment, searching my own heart for a reaction. I expected to feel something, satisfaction maybe, or a grim sense of justice. But there was nothing. Just a quiet emptiness. His life, his death, it all felt so distant, so disconnected from the peaceful, happy life I had built. His story had continued on its dark, violent trajectory, but mine had taken a completely different path. He was a ghost from a past life, a cautionary tale about greed and desperation. His death didn't bring me closure, because I had already found it on my own. "I feel nothing," I said, and I was surprised to find that it was the absolute truth. He's not a part of my story anymore. I put the phone down, took a sip of my wine, and leaned my head on Ben's shoulder. I reached down and stroked Max's soft white muzzle. He looked up at me, his tail giving a gentle thump, thump, thump against the wooden deck. In the end, it wasn't about the villains getting their comeuppance. It was about the survivors finding their peace. And I had found mine. The years passed. Gray hairs began to outnumber the brown, and laugh lines etched themselves permanently around my eyes. Ben and I traveled, we worked, we built a life that was rich in love and quiet contentment. Max grew old with a gentle grace. His once powerful legs became stiff with arthritis, and his hearing began to fade. But his spirit remained undimmed. He was my shadow, my constant companion, the furry heartbeat of our home. The end came on a Tuesday, on a soft spring morning. He was 14. He had stopped eating the day before, and he could no longer stand on his own. Liam came to the house, his vet bag in his hand, his eyes full of a shared sorrow. We laid Max on his favorite plaid blanket in a patch of sunlight on the living room floor. I cradled his beautiful white head in my lap, stroking his ears and whispering to him, telling him what a good boy he was, the best boy. I thanked him for saving me, for teaching me the meaning of loyalty, for giving me a love so pure and unconditional it had literally reshaped my life. Ben sat beside me, his hand on my back, his own tears falling freely. Liam administered the final, merciful injection. Max just sighed, a soft, gentle release of breath, and was gone. The silence he left behind was deafening, a physical void in the fabric of our home. We buried him in the backyard, under his favorite oak tree, the one he loved to nap beneath on warm summer afternoons. The grief was a physical weight, heavier than anything I had ever known. For weeks the house felt empty, haunted by the ghost of his gentle presence. I would imagine I heard the jingle of his collar or the click of his nails on the hardwood floor. But even in the depths of my sorrow, there was a profound sense of gratitude. He had been more than a dog. He had been my guardian angel, my business partner, my hero. A few months later, at our annual board meeting for the Max Project, Maria, the foundation's director, presented a proposal. A new, state-of-the-art animal shelter was being built in downtown Chicago, a flagship facility that would serve thousands of animals a year. One of the primary donors had pulled out, leaving them with a significant funding shortfall. Maria proposed that our foundation step in and provide the final multi-million-dollar grant needed to complete the project. There was one condition. The shelter was to be named the Max Carter Center for Animal Welfare. My breath caught in my throat. The board voted unanimously to approve it. The following year, I stood on a stage at the grand opening of the center, a beautiful, light-filled building teeming with life. Ben was in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. I looked out at the crowd of volunteers, donors, and animal lovers, and I told them our story. I told them about a lost and broken woman who was saved by a lost and broken dog. I told them how that dog's unwavering loyalty had inspired a company, a foundation, and a movement. Max taught me that you don't need a voice to speak the truth, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You just need a heart full of love and the courage to act on it. This building, this sanctuary, is his legacy. It's a testament to the fact that one small act of rescue, one flicker of loyalty, can change the world. In that moment, surrounded by the joyful sounds of barking dogs and purring cats, I felt his presence so strongly. He was gone, but he was also everywhere. His love had multiplied, echoed, and transformed into a permanent, living monument of hope. Life after Max was a new chapter. The sharp edges of grief slowly softened into a warm, cherished memory. Scrappy, Ben's terrier, stepped into the role of solo dog with a surprising gravitas, as if he knew he had big paws to fill. The Max Carter Center became a beacon of hope in the city, a place I would visit often, just to walk the halls and feel the pulse of its life-saving work. One day, I received an email with a subject line that made me pause. A voice from your past. It was from one of my old bridesmaids, a woman named Chloe who I hadn't spoken to since the wedding. She had moved to California shortly after, and we had simply lost touch. Emily, she wrote, I know it's been years, and I don't know if you even remember me, but I've been following the incredible work you've done with your foundation, and I felt compelled to reach out. I have something to confess, something I've felt guilty about for over a decade. She explained that in the months leading up to the wedding, Sarah had often confided in her, complaining about me. She had painted a picture of me as a demanding, self-absorbed bridezilla, and had spun a tale about how Mark was feeling trapped and suffocated. Chloe admitted that, at the time, she had bought into it. She had felt sorry for Sarah and Mark. On the day of the wedding, she continued, right before the ceremony, Sarah asked me to do something. She said you were having a panic attack and she had mixed a special herbal calming tincture for you in a champagne glass. She said you were refusing to drink it and asked if I, as another trusted friend, could bring it to you and convince you. I took the glass. But just as I was about to walk into the bridal suite, your mother stopped me to ask about my new job. We talked for a few minutes, and in that time, Sarah came back out and said, "Never mind, I handled it." She took the glass from me. Emily, I was literally seconds away from unknowingly bringing you the poison myself. When the truth came out, I was so horrified and so ashamed of my own gullibility that I couldn't face you. I just ran. I am so sorry. I sat with her email for a long time. It was a chilling reminder of how close I had come to the end, and how easily good people can be manipulated when a predator is skilled enough. The web of deceit Sarah had woven was wider than I had ever known. I wrote back to Chloe that same day. I told her that I remembered her only with fondness, and that I held no ill will. I told her that she was not to blame for Sarah's sickness, and that I hoped she had been able to let go of the guilt she had carried for so long. Forgiveness, I had learned, was not about absolving the guilty. It was about releasing the innocent, including myself, from the prisons of the past. We exchanged a few more emails, catching up on a decade of lost time. It was another loose end tied up. Another small act of healing in a life that was now defined not by its traumas, but by its triumphs. As I entered my late 50s, I began to think about my own legacy. Carter Home was more successful than ever, a self-sustaining entity with a brilliant executive team. The Max project was in the capable hands of Maria and her staff. Ben and I were financially secure. I felt a growing desire to do something more personal, to get my hands dirty again. I found my new purpose in an unexpected place, a small rural town in southern Wisconsin, about 3 hours from Chicago. It was a beautiful area, but it was economically depressed, and its county animal shelter was a grim, underfunded concrete box. Animals were kept in cramped, dark cages, and the euthanasia rate was heartbreakingly high. It reminded me of the place I had first found Max, a place of desperation and last chances. Ben and I bought a large, dilapidated farm property on the outskirts of town. It had 100 acres of rolling hills, a crumbling old farmhouse, and a massive, structurally sound barn. My vision was to transform it into a different kind of sanctuary, not a shelter, but a long-term rehabilitation and retirement home for animals that were considered unadoptable. Elderly dogs with chronic health issues, animals with severe behavioral problems from past trauma, and farm animals rescued from factory farm abuse. A place where they could live out the rest of their days in peace, dignity, and comfort. We called it the Golden Years Farm. Ben, the architect, designed the renovations, turning the old barn into a state-of-the-art facility with heated floors, spacious indoor/outdoor runs, and a full veterinary clinic. I, the designer, focused on the interiors, creating comfortable, home-like environments with soft bedding, safe toys, and plenty of natural light. We hired a staff of dedicated veterinarians, trainers, and caretakers. I stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Carter Home, taking on a more advisory role, and poured my heart and soul into the farm. My days were no longer filled with board meetings and design reviews, but with the simple, rewarding work of caring for broken animals. I spent my mornings mucking out stalls for rescued pigs, and my afternoons sitting quietly with a terrified dog who was learning to trust human hands for the first time. It was hard, emotionally draining work, but it was also the most fulfilling work I had ever done. Each small breakthrough, a pig learning to enjoy a belly rub, a cat finally purring after years of silence, a dog taking a treat from my hand, was a victory. The farm became a place of profound healing, not just for the animals, but for me. It was a full-circle journey. My life had been saved by one rescue animal. Now I would spend the rest of it paying that debt forward, creating a safe haven for hundreds more just like him. One day at the farm, a new arrival came in. He was a 10-year-old German Shepherd named Samson, surrendered by his family because they were moving and couldn't take him. It was a flimsy excuse, and the truth was written all over the dog's terrified, emaciated body. He was covered in old scars, and he flinched at any sudden movement or raised voice. He had clearly been abused. For the first week, he wouldn't come out of the corner of his kennel, refusing food and turning away from anyone who approached. Our head trainer, a wonderfully patient man named Carlos, worked with him every day, just sitting outside his kennel, talking to him in a low, calm voice, occasionally tossing a high-value treat inside. Progress was painfully slow. I started joining Carlos for his sessions, bringing my laptop and just working quietly nearby, letting Samson get used to my presence. After a few days, I decided to try something different. I brought Scrappy with me. Ben's little terrier, now an old man himself, had a calm, non-threatening energy that other dogs seemed to respond to. I let Scrappy off-leash outside the kennel. He trotted up to the door, sniffed, and then lay down, letting out a soft, playful huff. Samson, for the first time, lifted his head. He crept forward, his belly low to the ground, and sniffed at Scrappy through the chain-link fence. Scrappy just wagged his tail. We did this every day for a week. Each day, Samson grew a little bolder. He started to eat when we were there. He would stand at the kennel door, his tail giving a slight, tentative wag. Finally, the day came when Carlos felt it was safe to open the door. I held my breath. Samson slowly, cautiously, stepped out. He ignored the humans and went straight to Scrappy, the two of them touching noses in a silent canine greeting. It was the beginning of his recovery. With Scrappy as his comfort dog, Samson slowly started to trust the humans around him. He learned that a raised hand could mean a gentle scratch behind the ears, not a blow. He learned that a soft voice meant comfort, not danger. The light started to come back into his eyes. Watching his transformation, I was struck by the incredible resilience of these animals. They have a capacity for forgiveness and a willingness to love again that is nothing short of miraculous. They don't dwell on the past. They don't plot revenge. They just want a safe place to land. In a way, they were all my teachers. They taught me that no matter how deep the wounds, how profound the betrayal, healing is always possible. All it takes is time, patience, and the gentle, unwavering presence of a loyal friend. News of the Golden Years farm spread through the animal welfare community, and our waiting list grew longer and longer. We were at capacity, and the heartbreaking reality was that we had to turn away deserving animals every day. We needed to expand, but the cost was astronomical. One evening, I was at a charity gala in Chicago for the Max Carter Center. The keynote speaker was a man named Julian Croft, a reclusive tech billionaire who had recently started a philanthropic foundation. His speech was about disruptive philanthropy, investing in bold, innovative solutions to old problems. After his speech, I managed to get a moment of his time. I didn't give him a polished pitch. I just told him about Samson. I told him about the abused, terrified dog who was learning to trust again because of the patience of our staff and the friendship of a scruffy little terrier. He listened intently, his sharp blue eyes never leaving mine. When I was finished, he just nodded. "Send me a proposal," he said. I spent the next week compiling everything: our mission, our financials, our expansion plans, and a dozen personal stories of the animals we had saved. I sent it off, not expecting much. Men like Julian Croft were inundated with requests. A week later, his assistant called and scheduled a visit. He was coming to the farm. He arrived by helicopter, a whirlwind of quiet, intense energy. I gave him a tour, not of the facilities, but of the residents. I introduced him to a three-legged cat named Eileen, a blind horse rescued from the racing industry, and a pot-bellied pig who loved to have his belly scratched. Finally, I took him to Samson's run. Samson, who was now confident and social, trotted right up to the fence and licked Croft's outstretched hand. We stood there for a long time, just watching the animals. "You know," Croft said, his voice surprisingly soft, "I spent 20 years of my life building algorithms, creating systems of pure, cold logic. I made a fortune, but I was miserable. It's only in the last few years that I've learned that the most complex, most valuable system in the universe is a living creature's ability to heal and to love." He turned to me. "This isn't just a sanctuary, Miss Carter. This is a testament to the power of second chances. I'm not just going to fund your expansion. I'm going to give you an endowment that will ensure this place exists in perpetuity, long after you and I are gone." I was speechless. The number he named was staggering, enough to secure the farm's future forever. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated grace. It was the universe affirming that we were on the right path. That day, the Golden Years farm went from being my personal passion project to being a permanent, enduring legacy of compassion. With the Croft endowment securing the farm's future, I felt a sense of peace and completion I had never experienced before. I had built a successful, ethical company. I had created a foundation that was saving thousands of lives. I had established a sanctuary that would provide comfort to the most vulnerable animals for generations to come. I had found a deep, abiding love with a good man. My life was full. One day, an invitation arrived in the mail. It was for my 40th college reunion at Northwestern. I had never been to one before. The memories of that time were tangled up with Sarah, with the seeds of a betrayal that had almost cost me my life. Ben encouraged me to go. "You're not that person anymore," he said. "Don't let her ghost keep you from reconnecting with the good parts of your past." He was right. I went. It was a strange experience, walking through the old campus, seeing faces that were both familiar and changed by the passage of 4 decades. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen since graduation. We shared stories of our lives, our careers, our children, our divorces. During the reunion dinner, a woman I didn't immediately recognize came up to my table. She was a bit older, her hair gray, but her eyes were familiar. "Emily Carter?" she asked. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Professor Albright. I taught your senior design seminar." I remembered her instantly. She had been my favorite professor, a brilliant, tough, and inspiring woman who had pushed me to be a better designer. Of course, Professor, I said, standing to shake her hand. It's an honor to see you again. I've followed your career over the years, she said, her smile warm. Carter Home is a powerhouse, but it's your work with animals that I find most impressive. A life of purpose. She paused, her expression turning more serious. I also remember Sarah Bell. She was in that same seminar, a brilliant student, so much potential. She shook her head sadly. I read about what happened. A terrible, terrible tragedy. I always wondered, what turns a person like that? What happens to make someone's soul curdle? We talked for a while longer, about design and life and the strange paths we all end up taking. Her question stayed with me long after the reunion was over. What makes a soul curdle? I had spent years focusing on my own healing, on building a future. I had rarely allowed myself to look back and truly contemplate the psychology of my betrayers. I realized that the final piece of my own journey was not just to move on from what they did, but to try, in some small way, to understand why. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about wisdom. The professor's question sent me down a path of reflection. I thought about Sarah, about the quiet desperation she must have felt, the constant grinding pressure of comparing her life to mine. Her envy wasn't just about money or success. It was about a fundamental sense of inadequacy. In her mind, I was born for it, my life an effortless glide, while hers was a constant uphill struggle. My attempts at friendship, my casual generosity, had only served to widen the chasm in her own perception. She didn't want a helping hand. She wanted to be the one who didn't need it. It was a sickness of the spirit, a deep-seated belief that the only way to rise was to pull someone else down. And Mark. He was a simpler, more common kind of monster. He was a man defined by his appetites, for money, for status, for adoration. His charm was a tool, his smile a lure. He didn't have the complex, soul-corroding envy of Sarah. He just had a gaping void where his conscience should have been. My wealth was not a source of envy for him. It was a resource to be plundered, a solution to the problems his own recklessness had created. He was a predator who had found what he thought was easy prey. His fatal miscalculation was underestimating the loyalty of a creature he considered to be a simple-minded beast. In a strange way, they were perfect partners. Her deep-seated emotional resentment provided the motive and the twisted moral justification. His desperate, pragmatic greed provided the catalyst and the execution. Together, they formed a symbiotic relationship of pure toxicity, each feeding off the other's worst impulses. I realized then that their plan was never really about me. I was just an obstacle, a means to an end. My murder was a business transaction, a necessary step in their twisted version of a 5-year plan. This understanding brought a final, strange kind of peace. It decoupled their actions from my own self-worth. It wasn't that I was unlovable or foolish. It was that I had the misfortune of being targeted by two deeply broken people who saw me not as a person, but as a prize. My survival, then, was not just a matter of luck or a dog's loyalty. It was a rejection of their entire worldview. They believed that greed was stronger than love, that deceit was more powerful than truth, that a human life was a disposable commodity. My life, the one I had built from the ashes of their betrayal, was a testament to the fact that they were wrong. The foundations of a loyal home, I had learned, were not built with money or status. They were built with integrity, compassion, and the unwavering belief in the good. And I had all of that in abundance. My life today is quiet, and I am profoundly grateful for it. Ben and I split our time between our home in Chicago and the farm in Wisconsin. My days are measured in the gentle rhythms of nature, in the feeding schedules of animals and the changing of the seasons. I still sit on the board of Carter Home and the Max Project, but my true work is here, at the Golden Years Farm. My hands are often dirty, my clothes usually have a bit of dog hair on them, and I have never been happier. Sometimes, when a new, terrified animal arrives at the farm, I see a reflection of myself all those years ago. lost, broken, and desperately in need of a safe place to heal. And I know that this is my purpose. To provide that sanctuary, to be the soft voice and the gentle hand that can guide a broken spirit back towards the light. My story is not a fairy tale. It's a cautionary one. It's a story about the terrifying reality that monsters don't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes they have a key to your house. They eat dinner at your table and sleep in your bed. They hide behind masks of love and friendship, and their weapon of choice is your own trust. But it is also a story of hope. It's a story that proves that even after the most profound betrayals, it is possible to rebuild, to find love again, and to create a life of purpose and meaning. It is a testament to the fact that loyalty, in its purest form, can be a shield against the greatest of evils. And sometimes, that loyalty comes on four paws, with a wagging tail and a heart of pure, unadulterated gold. I am telling you this story from my office at the farm, which overlooks a vast green pasture. An old three-legged horse is basking in the afternoon sun. A group of rescued beagles are joyfully chasing a butterfly. It is a scene of pure, unadulterated peace, and it is a peace that I, and the loyal dog who saved me, have earned. When I look back on this entire saga, it's easy to see the clear rights and wrongs. Mark and Sarah were unequivocally wrong. Their actions a catastrophic moral failure driven by the common but corrosive sins of greed and envy. Their mistake wasn't just in the plotting of a crime, but in their fundamental underestimation of the forces they were up against. Not just the law, but the primal, unshakable power of loyalty. They saw Max as an inconvenience, a furry obstacle to be removed. They never conceived that an animal, a creature they deemed lesser, could possess an intelligence and devotion so profound it could unravel their entire intricate plan. That was their fatal hubris. Where did I go wrong? My therapist would say the blame is not mine to carry, and she's right. But for the sake of learning, my error was in allowing my desire for a happy ending to deafen me to the loud, insistent alarms of my own intuition. I saw the red flags, the subtle digs from Sarah, Mark's financial secrecy, the way Max reacted to them, but I chose to explain them away. I wanted the fairy tale to be real so badly that I was willing to edit out the parts of the story that didn't fit the narrative. That is a trap so many of us fall into. We value trust so highly that we are afraid to question it, for fear that the very act of questioning will shatter the illusion. The greatest lesson from this is that true loyalty doesn't demand blindness. In fact, it's the opposite. The loyalty Max showed me was not blind, it was incredibly perceptive. He saw the danger I couldn't or wouldn't see. The path to reducing the consequences of such a betrayal in our own lives is to learn to be as loyal to ourselves as a good dog is to us. We must listen to that inner growl, that gut feeling that tells us something is wrong, even when the world is smiling and telling us everything is perfect. We must learn to trust that instinct above all else, because it is our most primal and reliable defense system. Setting a boundary, asking a hard question, or walking away from a situation that feels wrong is not an act of cynicism. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation and self-respect. This story leaves me with two final thoughts I'd like to share with you. First, what red flag in your own life have you been tempted to ignore because the truth was too inconvenient? And second, what does the word loyalty truly mean to you, and where have you found it in its purest form? Thank you for being here with me.